Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's reading of The Borrowers by Mary Norton. Today we are on chapter 6. Your mother and I got you up, said Pod, to tell you about upstairs. Arietti, holding the great cup in both hands, looked at him over the edge. Pod coughed. You said a while back that the sky was dark brown with cracks in it. Well, it isn't. He looked at her almost accusingly. It's blue. I know, said Arietti. You know? Exclaimed Pod. Yes, of course I know. I've got the grating. Can you see the sky through the grating? Go on, interrupted Homily. Tell her about the gates. Well, said Pod ponderously, if you go outside this room, what do you see? A dark passage, said Arietti. And what else? Other rooms. And if you go farther, more passages. And if you're walking on in all the passages under the floor, however they twist and turn, what do you find? Gates, said Arietti. Strong gates, said Pod. Gates you can't open. What are they there for? Against the mice? Asked Arietti. Yes, agreed Pod uncertainly, as though he gave her half a mark. But mice never hurt no one. What else? Rats, suggested Arietti. We don't have rats, said Pod. What about cats? Cats? Echoed Arietti, surprised. Or to keep you in? Suggested Pod. To keep me in? Repeated Arietti, dismayed. Upstairs is a dangerous place, said Pod. And you, Arietti, are all we've got, see? It isn't like Hendreary. He still has two of his own and two of hers. Once, said Pod. Hendreary had three of his own. Your father's thinking of Eglatina, said Homily. Yes, said Pod. Eglatina. They never told her about upstairs, and they hadn't got no grating. They told her the sky was nailed up like, with cracks in it. A foolish way to bring up a child, murmured Homily. She sniffed slightly and touched Arietti's hair. But Eglina was no fool, said Pod. She didn't believe them. So one day, he went on, she went upstairs to see for herself. How did she get out? Asked Arietti, interested. Well, we didn't have so many gates then, just the one under the clock. Hendreary must have left it unlocked or something. Anyway, Eglatina went out. In a blue dress, said Homily, and a pair of button boots her father made her. Yellow kid with jet beads for buttons. Lovely they were. Well, said Pod, any other time it might have been all right. She'd have gone out, had a look around, had a bit of a fright maybe, and come back, none the worse and none the wiser. But things had been happening, said Homily. Yes, said Pod. She didn't know, as they never told her, that her father had been seen, and that upstairs they had got in a cat, and they waited a week, said Homily. They waited a month, and they hoped for a year. But no one ever saw Eglatina no more. And that, said Pod, after a pause and eyeing Arietti, is what happened to Eglatina. There was silence except for Pod's breathing and the faint bubble of the soup. It just broke up your Uncle Hendreary, said Homily at last. He never went upstairs again, in case, he said, he found the button boots. The only future was to emigrate. Arietti was silent for a moment, then she raised her head. Why did you tell me? She asked. Now, tonight. Homily got up. She moved restlessly towards the stove. We don't never talk of it, she said, at least not much, but tonight we felt. She turned suddenly. Well, we'll just say it out. Your father's been seen, Arietti. Oh, said Arietti. Who by? Well, it's something you've never heard of, but that's not the point. The point is, you think they'll get a cat? They may, said Homily. Arietti set down the soup for a moment, and she stared into the cup as it stood beside her almost knee-high on the floor. There was a dreamy secret, something about her lowered face. Couldn't we emigrate? She ventured at last, very softly. Homily gasped and clasped her hands and swung away towards the wall. You don't know what you're talking about, she cried, addressing a frying pan which hung there. Worms and weasels and cold and damp and... But supposing, said Arietti, that I went out like Eglatina did, and the cat ate me, then you and Papa would emigrate, wouldn't you? She asked, and her voice faltered. Wouldn't you? Homily swung around again, this time towards Arietti, and her face looked very angry. I shall smack you, Arietti Clock, if you don't behave yourself this minute. Arietti's eyes filled with tears. I was only thinking, she said, that I'd like to be there, to emigrate too, uneaten, she added softly as the tears fell. Now, said Pod, that is enough. You get off to bed, Arietti, uneaten and unbeaten both, then we'll talk about it in the morning. It's not that I'm afraid, cried Arietti angrily. I like cats. I bet the cat didn't eat Arietti, or Eglatina. I bet she just ran away because she hated being cooped up day after day, week after week, year after year, like I do, she added on a sob. Cooped up, repeated Homily, astounded. Arietti put her face into her hands. Gates, she gasped. Gates, gates, gates. Pod and Homily stared at each other across Arietti's bowed shoulders. You didn't ought to have brought it up, he said unhappily. Not so late at night. Arietti raised her tear-streaked face. Later early, what's the difference? She cried. Oh, I know, Papa's a wonderful borrower. I know we've managed to stay when all the others have gone. But what has it done for us in the end? I don't think it's so clever to live on alone forever and ever in a great big half-empty house under the floor with no one to talk to, no one to play with, nothing to see but dust and passages, no light but candlelight and firelight and what comes through the cracks. Eglatina had brothers, and Eglatina had half-brothers. Eglatina had a tame mouse. Eglatina had yellow boots with jet buttons, and Eglatina did get out just once. Shh, said Pod gently, not so loud. Above their heads, the floor creaked and the heavy footfalls heaved deliberately to and fro. They heard Mrs. Driver's grumbling voice and the clatter of the fire irons. Direct this stove, they heard her say. Wind's in the east again. Then they heard her raise her voice and call, Camp furl. Pod sat staring glumly at the floor. Arietti shivered a little and hugged herself more tightly into the knitted quilt, and Homily drew a long, slow breath. Suddenly she raised her head. The child is right, she announced firmly. Arietti's eyes grew big. Oh no, she began. It shocked her to be right. Parents were right, not children. Children could be anything, Arietti knew, and enjoyed saying it, knowing they were always safe and wrong. You see, Pod, went on Homily, it was different for you and me. There were other families, other children, the sinks in the scullery, you remember? And those people who lived behind the knife machine, I forget their names now, and the broom cupboard boys. And there was the underground passage from the stables, you know, that the rain pipes used. We had more, as you might say, freedom. Ah, yes, said Pod, in a way, but where does freedom take you? He looked up uncertainly. Where are they all now? Some of them may have bettered themselves, I shouldn't wonder, said Homily sharply. Times have changed in the whole house. Pickings aren't what they were. There were those who went, you remember, when they dug a trench for the gas pipe, over the fields and through the woods and all. A kind of a tunnel it gave them, all the way to Lighton Buzzard. And what did they find there? Asked Pod unkindly. A mountain of coke. Homily turned away. Arietti, she said in the same firm voice, supposing one day we pick a special day when there was no one about, and providing they don't get a cat, which I have my reasons for thinking they won't, supposing one day your father took you out borrowing, you'd be a good girl, wouldn't you? You'd do just what he said quickly and quietly and no arguing. Arietti turned quite pink and she clasped her hands together. Oh, she began in a static voice, but Pod cut in quickly. No, Homily, we've got to think. You can't just say things like that without thinking it out proper. I've been seeing, remember? This is no kind of time for taking a child upstairs. There won't be no cat, said Homily. There wasn't no screeching. It's not like that time with Rosa Pickhatcher. All the same, said Pod uncertainly. The risk's there. I never heard of no girl going borrowing before. The way I look at it, said Homily, and it's only now it's come to me. If you had a son, you'd take him borrowing now, wouldn't you? Well, you haven't got no son. Only Arietti. Supposing something happened to you or me, where would Arietti be if she hadn't learned to borrow? Pod stared down at his knees. Yes, he said after a moment, I see what you mean. And it'll give her a bit of interest like and stop her hankering. Hankering for what? For blue sky and grass and such like. Arrietty caught her breath, and Homily turned on her swiftly. It's no good, Arrietty. I'm not going to emigrate, not for you or anybody else. Aha, said Pod, and he began to laugh. So that's it. Shh, said Homily, annoyed, and glanced quickly at the ceiling. Not so loud. Now kiss your father, Arrietty, she went on briskly, and pop off back to bed. As Arrietty snuggled down under the bedclothes, she felt, creeping up from her toes, a glow of happiness, like a glow of warmth. She heard their voices rising and falling in the next room. Homilies went on, measured and confident. There was. Arrietty felt a kind of conviction behind it. It was the winning voice. Once she heard Pod get up and scrape the scrape of a chair. I don't like it, she heard him say, and then she heard Homily whisper, Hush! And there was tremendous footfalls on the floor above and the sudden clash of hands. Arrietty, half dozing, glanced up at her painted ceiling. Flor de Havana, proclaimed the banners proudly. And lovely, gauzy ladies blew their trumpets silently, triumphantly, on soundless notes of glee. And here is a picture of Arrietty's bedroom and Arrietty in her bed. And that concludes chapter 6, and tomorrow we will read chapter 7. Have a great day. Bye.